Hey everyone, tonight we begin with the fascinating world of job applications and hiring in ancient Rome. We're diving into the economics and social power plays behind landing a position long before LinkedIn or online forms existed. Think modern job hunting is stressful. Imagine having your resume not on paper, but literally hanging around your neck for all to see, like a walking billboard of your skills and connections. If you think refreshing your email inbox is nerve-wracking, in Rome, your social standing was on full display, no delete button in sight. If you enjoy unraveling how people navigated work and status thousands of years ago, feel free to like and subscribe. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing this story connect across the world. Now, before we step back in time, take a moment to dim the lights around you. Maybe turn on a fan or let some soft background noise fill the room, that gentle hum helping you relax. Get comfortable in your seat or bed and breathe slowly. Inhale, exhale, letting your mind settle as we prepare to explore. Picture that your resume isn't a neat PDF or a LinkedIn profile. It's a tangible badge you wear, signaling your skills and your social ties to everyone passing by. No hiding behind algorithms here. Your professional life is part of your daily attire, visible and immediate. Now imagine us stepping into a bustling Roman street where the chatter of merchants and the footsteps of citizens blend into the city's rhythm. We're about to explore a world where power, economy, and identity mingle on every corner. Here, tucked between the stone columns and low market stalls, the air holds a calm hush, waiting for the city to wake. Oil lamps flicker gently along the edges of the square, their warm pools of light dancing on the coarse stone beneath our feet. Nearby, a brazier sends up occasional sparks, its subtle glow blending with the pale silver of the moon overhead. The forum spreads out before us like a patchwork of shadow and light. Narrow alleys thread between wooden stalls, their roofs patched and worn. The stone paving is uneven, each block telling its own quiet story in texture and wear. A few figures move softly, their sandals brushing the stones with barely their steps. Here and there, a curtain of cloth rustles gently as a vendor adjusts his wares. In the distance, faint water laps against the city's aqueduct channels, adding a soft, rhythmic pulse to the stillness. The occasional low murmur of voices drifts through the air, like a whispered conversation that never quite reaches clarity. You feel the cool night air brush against your skin, carrying the slight chill that precedes sunrise. The stone beneath your fingertips is rough and solid, its edges worn smooth from countless hands passing this way. Nearby, a wooden post is smooth and warm from the brazier's heat, a comforting contrast to the hard stone. Your cloak settles around your shoulders, a familiar weight that holds you steady as a fine dust stirs lightly underfoot with every careful step. The mix of textures grounds you here, in this quiet pause between night and day. The smells are subtle but distinct. Smoke from the brazier mingles with the faint, yeasty scent of bread cooling on a vendor's stall. There's the sharp tang of resin, used to seal and preserve goods, blending with the briny hint of sea salt carried from the harbor not far away. These scents wrap around you like a soft cloak, anchoring you to this moment in time. A vendor gently arranges woven baskets filled with figs and olives, his movements slow and deliberate as he prepares for the day ahead. Nearby, a scribe dips a reed pen into ink, patiently blotting his writing on a wooden tablet, the faint scratch of nib on surface a quiet rhythm. A child yawns widely, rubbing sleepy eyes as they cling to a parent's hand. A guard shifts his spear, the metal catching the lamp's glow for a brief flash before settling back into shadow. Not exactly the streamlined efficiency of a modern HR department, but it works here. each movement part of the rhythm that keeps this place alive. I pause beside a stall, warming my hands near the brazier's gentle heat, tracing the grain of a wooden post with my fingertips. The quiet here invites a moment of stillness, a chance to breathe in the calm and take in the small details that might otherwise slip away. It's in these textures and sounds that the essence of this place lives. There's a tender strangeness to this early hour, the anticipation of a city on the cusp of waking, the ordinary routines unfolding under moon and lamplight. It feels like a secret held just for those who arrive quietly enough to notice. For now, let the soft footsteps and flickering lamps settle around you. These stones and voices carry older stories worth telling, stories we'll begin to uncover soon. Their voices carried the weight of unseen forces, and I listened closely as they described the delicate balance held between gods and mortals. The sky above us, deep and endless, seemed like a vast tapestry where every star was a thread woven by divine hands. Life in this ancient city moved with a rhythm both steady and mysterious, a dance choreographed by unseen powers no less real than the stones beneath my feet. Morning brought the scent of freshly baked bread mingling with the sharpness of resin, burning in small altars outside humble homes. The city stirred to the sound of carts creaking over worn cobblestones and voices calling softly across the narrow streets. Women carried water in clay jars, their footsteps steady and sure, while children chased each other past stalls piled high with figs and olives. At dusk the air cooled, and the smell of wood smoke rose from cooking fires, mixing with the faint saltiness carried on the breeze from the nearby sea. Night was often filled with the gentle rustle of cloth and the distant murmur of prayers whispered to gods who seemed both near and impossibly distant. Our lives were shaped by the gods, the many faces of power and fate that watched over us with both mercy and stern judgment. I remember the priests' chants echoing through the marble halls, their voices weaving prayers that floated like incense smoke, twisting and rising toward the temple ceilings. Each god had their place, the protector of the harvest, the keeper of the waters, the bringer of the sun's warmth. Omens were read in the flight of birds and the patterns of fire. The belief that destiny was a thread spun by divine hands gave weight to every choice, every breath drawn in this city of stone and light. Rulers moved among us as both humans and symbols. The king's presence was felt more than seen, his power carried in the banners that fluttered over the gates, in the carved reliefs that told stories of conquest and justice. Priests guided the rituals that bound the people to the gods and to their leaders, their faces serene but unreadable as they performed ceremonies beneath flickering torchlight. Though distant, these figures shaped the pulse of the city, their authority as natural and constant as the rising sun. One ritual I remember well was the evening offering, small clay bowls filled with honeyed wine and fragrant herbs left at the foot of the village's carved stone pillar. The pillar itself was worn smooth from centuries of hands, touching it for luck, a silent witness to the hopes and fears of generations. As the sun dipped low, families gathered to chant softly, their voices blending with the crackle of flame and the scent of burning incense. It was a moment suspended between earth and sky, a pause where the world seemed held by something larger, something unseen yet deeply felt. I grew up inside these rhythms, my family woven tightly into the fabric of this city's life. My mother taught me the names of the gods as she prepared the morning bread, her hands dusted with flour and her voice steady with tradition. My father's stories traced the lineages of rulers and the ancient laws that kept the city in order. Every day was shaped by the interplay of work, worship, and waiting for the next festival or market day. I learned early that to belong here was to carry the weight of countless stories, both whispered and shouted, etched into every corner of stone and shadow. The time I knew was neither calm nor chaos, but a delicate balance, peaceful enough to allow the slow growth of crops and families, yet always shadowed by the possibility of change, of storms both literal and unseen. Fear and hope lived side by side, like twin shadows cast by the flickering torchlight. We moved through our days with a quiet reverence for the forces that shaped our fortunes, knowing that beneath the surface the city's heart beat steadily, carrying the weight of all who had come before. It is in this world, rich with prayer and memory, that I came into being. Among these stones and sacred whispers, beneath the watchful eyes of gods and rulers, my story quietly begins. From this silence, my life emerges, and with it, the tales I am about to share. It is time I tell you who I am, not as a mere shadow among the stones, but as a presence shaped by this city's breath and light. You might notice the way my hands bear the faint stains of ink, the edges darkened from hours spent tracing symbols on wooden tablets. They are neither delicate nor rough, but steady, hands that have learned to hold a reed pen as surely as a spear. My hair falls in loose strands, catching the lamplight like threads of dusk, often brushed back hastily before the morning's work begins. There is a scar beneath my left wrist, a thin line, pale now, a quiet reminder of a moment when the world shifted unexpectedly beneath my feet. People see me in different ways. Some glance with cautious respect, as if aware that I carry more than just words on my lips. Others whisper behind cupped hands, their voices low with suspicion or curiosity, unsure whether I am friend or stranger to the old orders that govern our lives. A few avoid my gaze altogether, unsettled perhaps by the quiet intensity I carry, or the strange stillness that seems to settle around me like a cloak. Yet in the marketplace or the temple halls, some seek me out, not for idle talk, but because my presence offers a kind of steadying thread through the ever-shifting tides of rumor and fate. But how do I see myself? I often feel like one caught between worlds, neither fully of the city's bustling heart nor entirely apart from it. My voice, when I speak, is low and measured, carrying the weight of knowledge learned in solitude rather than loud proclamations. I am aware of the space I take up, the quiet pulse I bring to the places I walk, yet I carry an undercurrent of restlessness, as if my true path lies just beyond the edges of what is known. There is a subtle unease in my bones, a whisper of something unspoken, a thread of destiny that I cannot yet name, but that pulls gently beneath the surface of every day. Around my neck, I wear a slender amulet carved from dark stone, smooth and cool against my skin. It is simple, unadorned, yet it holds meaning deeper than words, a symbol of protection perhaps, or a token from an ancestor whose story is folded into my own. When the light falls just right, the amulet seems to catch a shadow within itself, as if it holds a secret half glimpsed in dreams. I touch it without thought, a habit born of years, grounding me in moments when the world feels too vast or uncertain. It is a quiet emblem of who I am beneath the surface. In this city, I am known as a scribe, one who records the lives and laws that shape our days. My place is neither among the highest nor the lowest. I dwell in the liminal spaces where knowledge and power intersect. My days are filled with the scent of ink and the rough texture of wooden tablets, the soft rustle of papyrus, and the steady scratch of reed pens. I move through workshops and temples alike, a silent witness to the unfolding stories of gods and men. Though my role is humble, It carries a weight that I feel keenly, a responsibility to hold memory and truth, even when both feel fragile as dust. There is a quiet seed of something more, though, a feeling that flickers at the edges of my waking mind. Sometimes, in the stillness before dawn, I awaken from dreams where voices call me by names I do not know, or where shadows move with a purpose beyond my understanding. These moments leave a lingering pulse beneath my ribs, a sense that I am marked by forces unseen, that my path is tied to the turning of fate itself. I do not speak of these things aloud, but they shape the quiet expectation that hums beneath my skin. This life carries its solitude too, the weight of knowing and not always sharing, of holding secrets that set me apart, even among those who trust me. There is pride in the work I do, in the small ways I contribute to the city's order, but also a loneliness that settles like dusk, soft and unyielding. It is a companion as constant as the stone beneath my feet, a reminder that to belong often means to stand apart. Yet within this solitude I find a strange strength, a calm readiness for whatever may come. To understand me, you must know where I began. My story is not just the sum of these days beneath the gods and rulers, but the roots from which I grew, the soil of my past, the hands that shaped me, the whispers of a childhood spent in shadows both bright and dark. It is from these beginnings that the true shape of my life will emerge, and it is there I must now take you. The air carries the scent of damp earth and wild herbs drying beneath sun-warmed stones. Narrow paths wind between houses of sun-baked clay, their carved wooden doors worn smooth by hands both young and old. In this quiet place, life moves with the rhythm of the seasons, marked by the rising and setting sun and the steady flow of the river itself. My earliest memories are woven from these simple textures: the coolness of grass beneath bare feet, the rough fabric of my tunic against skin, the taste of honey mixed into warm milk at morning's first light. I was raised by my mother, whose hands held the softness of woven cloth and the strength of steady work, and my father, whose voice carried stories like the river carries its stones, patient and unyielding. There was also an elder, a woman whose eyes seemed to hold the weight of years and whose whispered songs filled our hearth at night. Together they shaped the world I first knew, a world of chores shared beneath the shade of olive trees, of laughter spilling between the narrow alleys as children chased each other with reckless joy, of rituals where we left small offerings of grain and water to the spirits who guarded our village. The smell of fresh bread baking in communal ovens mingled with the sharp tang of olives pressed for oil, and these scents became the markers of safety and belonging. As a child, I felt the gentle cradle of this life, the comfort of routines that rose and fell like the river's tide. Yet beneath the surface of that peace there was a stirring, a sense of wonder at the vast sky above, at the flickering shadows cast by torchlight during evening prayers, at the stories told by the stars. At times, a shadow of loneliness passed through me, a quiet echo of being different, though I could not yet name it. The world was both a place of light and of mystery, and I felt myself drawn toward the secrets whispered in the wind, even as I clung to the warm closeness of home. One night, when the moon hung low and silver over the village, I dreamed of a pillar of stone glowing faintly beneath my fingers, a pillar carved with symbols I could not read, but felt in my bones. When I awoke, my wrist bore the mark of a scar, pale and thin, which no one could explain. It was the first sign, though I did not understand it then, that something beyond the ordinary had chosen to touch my life. The elders spoke little of such things, but I knew, in the quiet of my heart, that this was a beginning, a thread woven into the fabric of fate. I remember a single moment when the river swelled after a sudden rain, and I stood at its edge, watching the dark water rush past with a force that both frightened and fascinated me. My father's hand rested lightly on my shoulder, steady and sure, yet I felt pulled toward the unknown currents beyond the banks. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the air smelled of wet stone and fresh rain. In that moment I understood that the world was vast and wild, and that I was a small part of its endless flow. The memory stays with me, an imprint of the tension between safety and the call of something greater. The land itself shaped me as much as those who raised me. The river's steady presence taught patience, the hard sun forged resilience, and the songs of the village elders instilled a sense of the sacred weaving through everyday life. Our beliefs tied us tightly to the invisible forces that shape the seasons and the fortunes of men, and I learned early to listen to the rustle of leaves, to the cadence of prayers, to the silent language of omens. This place was both a cradle and a forge, gentle in its rhythms yet unyielding in its demands. The mood of those early days was one of quiet reverence and soft light, a world where the sacred and the mundane danced together beneath the same sky. Even in moments of solitude, I felt surrounded by the pulse of life, by the murmur of the river, the murmur of voices, the murmur of prayers offered at dusk. It was a peace that held its own weight, a calm before the inevitable change that waits just beyond the horizon. But childhood is never eternal. The world soon came calling. Those first days gave me roots, but the winds of change were stirring, and the path laid before me would soon lead beyond the gentle shores of my beginning. The soft veil of childhood innocence began to lift, the day the skies darkened with a sudden storm, and the village held its breath. I remember how the wind tore at the thatched roofs, how the distant thunder rolled like a warning, and how the first heavy drops of rain fell cold against my skin as I scrambled to gather firewood. It was no longer a world of simple warmth and laughter. A shadow had crept in, subtle but undeniable. Hunger followed soon after, tightening its grip as the river swelled, and the fields lay waterlogged, their once fertile soil cracked and barren beneath the relentless rain. My small hands trembled as I clutched the bitter herbs handed to me for medicine, their taste sharp and unwelcome on my tongue. The scent of wet earth mixed with smoke from the hearth where my mother tried to coax a flame alive, but even her warmth seemed diminished by the weight of those dark days. Amid this creeping hardship, I was given a task that felt far heavier than my years, fetching water from the distant well when the usual path was slick with mud and treacherous beneath the storm's wrath. The clay beneath my feet turned to slippery clay, and the cold rain soaked through my clothes, chilling me to the bone. My fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled with the heavy clay bowl, and more than once I stumbled, the water sloshing dangerously close to spilling. I remember the taste of the metallic water on my lips, mingled with the salt of tears I refused to shed. When I finally returned, breathless and shivering, the look in my father's eyes was neither praise nor disappointment, only a quiet expectation that I had done what was needed. It was a small victory, yet it carried the weight of responsibility that I had not known before. Not all challenges came from the unforgiving weather or the demands of labor. There was a moment of tension between me and my elder brother, whose rough words cut deeper than any storm. He mocked my clumsiness, declaring me unfit for the tasks that defined our family's honor. His voice echoed through the narrow lanes, harsh as the crack of thunder, and I felt the sting of shame burn my cheek. Yet beneath that shame, a flicker of something new took root, a stubbornness not to be broken by words, a quiet determination to prove myself beneath the weight of doubt. Our clash was brief, but it left a lingering silence, heavy and uneasy, like the calm after a tempest's rage. One night, when the village lay hushed beneath a blanket of mist, I dreamed again of the glowing pillar from my childhood, but this time it stood shattered, its fragments scattered like stars fallen from the sky. As I reached to touch the broken stone, a whisper drifted on the wind, an unspoken warning or a promise, I could not tell. The dream lingered with me in waking hours, its strange light casting shadows on my thoughts. It was a moment that felt larger than itself, a hidden sign woven into the fabric of those early trials, a glimpse of the path that would stretch far beyond the village's quiet borders. These first struggles shaped me in ways I could not yet understand. Fear seeped into my bones, the fear of failing those I loved, of storms that could not be held at bay, of voices that judged too harshly. But alongside that fear grew resilience, a steady flame that flickered in the darkest moments and urged me onward. The taste of bitter herbs, the sting of cold rain, the weight of heavy tasks, all became markers of a slow awakening, a quiet forging of a spirit that would need to endure much more. I learned that strength was not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. Looking back now, I see those days as the soil where my resolve first took root, where small defeats and fragile victories intertwined to prepare me for what was to come. The village, with its cracked earth and whispered prayers, was both a sanctuary and a crucible. The sounds of the storm, the sharp scent of smoke, the rough touch of wet clay, these sensory threads weave through my memory, binding me to a time when the world first showed its edge. What once felt like mere hardships revealed themselves as the quiet shaping hands of fate. But those were only shadows of the greater storms that lay ahead. What I thought were trials were but whispers of the tempests yet to come, and I did not know then that the path before me would demand far more than I had yet imagined. The day arrived when the village gathered beneath a sky heavy with rain, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and smoke from bundled torches. The elders spoke in low tones, their voices weaving through the crowd like the distant rumble of thunder, while children clung close to their mothers, sensing the weight of what was to come. I stood among them, my heart a steady drum in my chest, as the first great test of my life unfolded, a trial that threatened not just my place in the village, but the fragile thread of belonging I clung to. The challenge was a rite older than memory, held in the firelit hall where stone walls seemed to absorb the flickering shadows cast by the dancing flames. It was not a battle of swords or shields, but a test of endurance and will. A night spent alone in the wild forest beyond the river's bend, a passage through cold and dark to prove readiness for what lay beyond childhood. The wind howled through the trees like a living thing, and the scent of wet leaves and moss filled my lungs as I stepped beyond the safety of the village. My fingers trembled, brushing against the rough bark of ancient oaks, and the chill seeped through my cloak, biting into the skin beneath. I did not flee, though every instinct screamed for warmth and shelter. I stood my ground, steadying my breath against the rising fear. Hours passed as shadows thickened, and the forest whispered secrets I could not understand. The taste of dry bread and bitter herbs lingered on my tongue, mingling with the metallic tang of sweat. My legs ached, my hands scraped by brambles, yet I remained rooted in that cold wilderness, refusing to let the night claim me. When dawn finally brushed the sky with pale light, I returned to the village, eyes wide and unblinking, marked by the ordeal I had endured. The elders received me not with words of praise, but with a solemn nod that carried the weight of acceptance. I had gained a new role, no longer a child sheltered by routine, but one tested by solitude and the unknown. Inside me stirred a mixture of pride and sorrow. The fear that had gripped me in the forest did not vanish. It lingered like a shadow at the edge of my vision, a reminder of vulnerability. Yet I felt awakened, as if a door had opened to a part of myself I had never known. The villagers' eyes held a different light when they looked at me, respect tempered with caution, as though I had stepped across an invisible boundary. My brother's earlier scorn seemed distant now, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement that I had become something more complex, something no longer defined simply by boyhood or kinship. The aftermath was not a triumph, sung by voices or celebrated with feasts, but a subtle shift in the rhythms of daily life. Tasks once shared became mine alone to bear. The weight of expectation settled on shoulders still young, pressing down like the cold stone floors beneath the firelit hall. I carried the memory of that night like a secret wound, a quiet ache beneath the skin, its edges sharp and raw. Each breath reminded me of the forest's chill, the endless dark, and the choice I had made to stand firm rather than turn away. It was a turning point, not only in how others saw me, but in how I saw myself, caught between the safety of what was known and the vastness of what awaited. Looking back, I realized that the trial was less about the night itself and more about the moment I decided to face it. That decision, carved from fear and determination, shaped the path I would walk. It marked the end of innocence and the beginning of a journey where every step would carry weight, where each choice would ripple outward, altering the shape of my life. The taste of bitter herbs and the cold wind in that forest remain etched in my memory, symbols of a crossing from one world into another. Yet even this was only the threshold. The true path still waited in shadow. That night was but the first doorway into deeper trials, where the quiet strength I found would be tested again and again. The boy I had been was left behind, and another self began to walk in my place, toward horizons I could not yet see. After that turning point, the years stretched before me like open roads, winding beyond the river's edge and the village I once knew. I left behind the firelit halls and familiar faces, stepping into a world vast and uncertain. My wandering was not by choice, but by necessity, a pilgrimage through distant lands where the sky broadened and the air tasted different with every breath. The earth beneath my feet shifted from mud to stone, from dry dust to slippery moss. I walked through mountain passes where cold winds bit through my threadbare cloak and across marketplaces thick with the scent of spices and smoke. Nights were spent beneath canopies of stars, their silent gleam a quiet witness to my solitude. Hunger became a constant companion, gnawing at my ribs as sharply as the biting cold. Fatigue settled deep into my bones after endless days of travel, the weight of my pack a reminder of the burdens I carried within and without. Rejection was no stranger either. Doors closed with heavy thuds, faces turned away with suspicion or indifference. Storms swept through the valleys, drumming relentless rhythms on the roofs of rough inns where I sought shelter. Each hardship carved away a layer of my former self, leaving behind a rawer, quieter version shaped by endurance rather than comfort. Along the way, I met those who altered the course of my journey, teachers who spoke in soft voices about herbs and healing, strangers who shared bread, and stories by flickering fires, rival travelers whose sharp eyes measured me with unspoken challenge. Their languages mingled in the air like unfamiliar melodies, and their customs painted new colors on the canvas of my understanding. I learned to read the signs of the land, to tend wounds with plants gathered by riverbanks, and to listen with patience when words failed. Each encounter was a thread woven into the fabric of my growing wisdom. With time, I gathered skills that became my tools and shields. I learned the delicate art of healing, feeling the pulse beneath bruised skin and smelling the bitter earth that birthed medicinal roots. Patience took root in me like a slow-growing tree, its branches stretching wide against the storms of doubt and despair. The roughness of travel toughened my hands, but it was the quiet lessons, how to wait, how to see beyond the surface, that shaped me most deeply. I carried these gifts like talismans, fragile but enduring in the face of relentless change. The wandering years transformed not only my body but my soul. I grew resilient, bending without breaking beneath the weight of loneliness and uncertainty. Humility settled in as the many lands I crossed revealed how small my place was in the vastness of the world. Wisdom blossomed from the slow recognition that life was less about conquering and more about understanding the rhythms beneath the chaos. I learned to find peace in the in-between moments. Dawn's first light on a frost-kissed field, the crackle of a fire shared with a stranger, the taste of dry bread after a long day's march. One night remains vivid above all others, a memory etched in senses and spirit. I had sought refuge in a narrow canyon, the walls rising like silent guards around me. A storm gathered, wind whipping the air into a frenzy, and rain falling in heavy sheets. Huddled beneath a ragged cloak, I shared a meager meal of stale bread and bitter herbs with a traveler whose eyes held stories I could not speak. The fire between us flickered and sputtered, casting long shadows that danced with the thunder's pulse. In that moment, the world was both immense and intimate, a place of danger and unexpected kindness, a reminder that even in exile, connection could grow. The taste of the rain on my lips mingled with the salt of shared tears, a silent testament to survival and hope. The mood of my journey was a blend of loneliness and liberation, sacred in its unfolding yet harsh in its demands. Each step was a lesson in surrender and strength, a slow unspooling of the boy I had been into the man I was becoming. The road stretched on, endless and unknown, but beneath my feet I felt the steady rhythm of progress, the quiet pulse of transformation. Yet even then, I sensed these were only the footsteps before the true trial. The wandering years, with all their bitter winds and fleeting warmth, were not the end of my shaping. They were a prelude, a necessary unfolding before the deeper, heavier challenges that awaited just beyond the horizon. The endless roads, the hunger, the fatigue, all had shaped me, but none had shattered the core as this moment did. It was not a sudden storm or a fierce battle, but a quiet betrayal whispered among those I had trusted. The silence that followed was heavier than any tempest, pressing against my chest like a stone too large to lift. In that stillness, I felt the fragile shell of my naive self begin to crumble, revealing the rawness beneath. The betrayal was subtle but searing. A friend, once a companion in shared hardship, turned away when I needed loyalty most. Their words, sharp and cold, cut deeper than any wound, leaving me exposed and alone in a world that had never promised kindness. The part of me that had believed in simple bonds, in the goodness of others, shattered completely. I was no longer the obedient child who had followed the village's rituals without question, nor the fearful youth who sought safety in routine. That innocence, that trust, was lost in the quiet aftermath. The breaking was not just in my heart, but in my body and spirit. I remember the fever that seized me in the nights that followed, sweat soaking my rough cloak, my hands trembling as if they carried the weight of all my doubts. The cold stone floor beneath me seemed to absorb my pain, the silence of the empty room echoing the hollowness inside. I tasted bitterness on my tongue, bitter herbs and ash from the fire I barely tended. Every breath was a struggle between holding on and letting go, between the past I could no longer claim and a future I could not yet see. In the days that followed, I carried with me a new symbol of this transformation, a deep scar across my left hand, a mark from a ritual I had undertaken in solitude. It was not a mark of triumph, but a vow to myself, to shed the old skin and face what lay ahead with clarity and strength. That scar was a pale fire beneath my skin, a reminder of the breaking and the promise of becoming. It burned quietly, a steady pulse in the dark moments when doubt tried to reclaim me. I first noticed the change not in grand gestures but in small, silent shifts. The weight of my gaze, steadier now, no longer flickered with the uncertain light of youth. I moved through the world with a new clarity, a purpose that hummed beneath my words and actions. The fear that once held me tight loosened its grip, replaced by a cautious strength that neither rushed nor faltered. I could feel the edges of my identity sharpening, becoming something both ancient and yet entirely my own. Others saw this change as well. Some met me with awe, their eyes reflecting a mixture of respect and fear, as if they recognized the quiet power in the stillness I now carried. Others kept their distance, wary of the distance that had grown between the boy they once knew and the man I was becoming. Family and strangers alike sensed the shift, the subtle but unyielding transformation that marked me as different, as someone who had stepped through a threshold they could not yet see. With this breaking came a new direction, a calling that pulled me forward. No longer bound by the simple rhythms of wandering, I felt drawn towards service, to heal what was broken around me, to forge a path not just for myself, but for those who, like me, carried scars unseen. The journey ahead was no longer just about survival or discovery, but about purpose and belonging in a world that demanded both resilience and grace. Yet even then, I did not know. This was only the first shedding of my skin. The change within me did not remain hidden, nor did it settle quietly into the folds of my days. It spread outward like smoke from a smoldering ember, reaching the eyes and ears of those I had left behind and the strangers I now met along my path. Family first noticed the subtle shift, the steadiness in my voice, the way my hands moved with newfound purpose. Peers who once saw me as a boy still learning now regarded me with a mixture of respect and wary distance. Even the leaders, those who held the threads of our scattered communities, took note. Whispers followed in corridors and under breath, speaking of the scar that marked me, the vow I bore quietly but unmistakably. Their eyes measured me, not just as one who had survived, but as one transformed, as if I carried a new weight that both invited and demanded attention. With this recognition came new roles and burdens I had not sought, but could not refuse. The responsibility to guide, to heal, to serve in ways beyond simple survival was laid upon my shoulders almost imperceptibly at first. Invitations to councils arrived, their messages wrapped in the scent of burning oil and incense, calling me to stand among those who shaped our fates. Command was not given outright, but the expectation lingered in the heavy cloak of duty I came to wear, a mantle woven from the threads of my changed self. Ritual duties, once the domain of elders and those steeped in tradition, now beckoned me forward, as if the scar on my hand had branded me a keeper of secrets and strength. Society's ripples spread unevenly. Some were inspired, drawn to the steadiness that now steadied me, forming quiet circles of loyalty and reverence around the edges of my path. Others looked on with suspicion, their eyes narrowing against the unfamiliar contour of a man reborn. This new self did not bring harmony alone. Clashes arose as the old and new collided, words sharpened in heated council debates, glances filled with unspoken challenge in marketplaces. Yet within those tensions lay a strange unity, a shared recognition that something had shifted irrevocably. Awe mingled with fear and loyalty with doubt, creating a fragile balance that reminded me constantly of the precariousness of my position. The transformation I bore was both a beacon and a barrier, drawing some close while pushing others away. Among these unforeseen consequences came jealousy, a shadow I had not anticipated. The quiet respect many offered was shadowed by whispered resentments, alliances fractured in silence, and some doors I had hoped to open remained firmly shut. This burden, heavier than any cloak, weighed on me in moments of solitude, the taste of salt lingering on my lips from sweat and unspilled tears. One evening, beneath torches flickering against cold stone walls, I found myself standing before the council, a gathering of voices older and deeper than my own. Their eyes, sharp as flint, fixed upon me as I spoke, not just with words, but with the quiet certainty born of my journey. The hall echoed with whispers and the rustling of cloaks, the scent of burning oil thick in the air. In that moment, the scar on my hand seemed to pulse with a quiet fire, a symbol not just of personal transformation, but of the change I had come to represent. It was a scene etched into memory, the weight of expectation pressing down, the flicker of torchlight casting long shadows, the taste of dry bread and strong wine grounding me in the gravity of what had become. I was no longer simply a wanderer or a survivor. I had become a guide, a symbol of resilience and renewal. Yet to be seen differently was a strange thing. Pride and humility warred within me, alongside a keen undercurrent of alienation. The world had begun to reshape around me, and with every gaze, every whispered word, I felt the distance between who I had been and who I was becoming. It was a solitude born not of loneliness but of transformation itself, a place where old comforts no longer fit, and new ones had yet to form. I learned to carry this cold stone of difference with quiet grace, knowing that to be changed was to be set apart, for better or worse. But these ripples were only the first waves of a tide I could not escape. At first, these demands arrived as subtle summons, leaders requesting my presence in shadowed chambers, elders speaking in hushed tones of purpose and power, and a society that looked to me for guidance, as if I embodied a fate larger than my own. The scent of incense filled the air during these meetings, mingling with the faint moisture of sweat on anxious brows. Outside, the sky darkened with gathering storm clouds, as if the heavens themselves whispered of change. Omens followed in their wake, a raven's call at dawn, a sudden wind that stirred the banners above the council hall, and a recurring vision in which I stood alone before a vast expanse, the horizon aflame with uncertain light. These signs threaded through my days like a silent drumbeat, marking the steady approach of a destiny I could no longer ignore. I stepped into a greater arena, one that stretched far beyond the quiet solitude of my past. The council chambers, once a distant place of whispered politics, now became my stage, their cold stone walls echoing with the voices of those who shaped the course of many lives. The heavy cloak I donned felt both a comfort and a weight, its coarse fabric pressing against my skin as I took my place among warriors, elders, and rulers. Around me, banners rose against stormy skies, their colors vivid and resolute, while the distant rumble of marching feet reminded me that the world was shifting toward unrest. Here in this chamber, the expectations of obedience, sacrifice, and guidance settled upon me like a mantle I had not chosen, but could not shed. Each gaze carried a silent question. Would I rise to meet the demand or falter beneath its weight? Within me stirred a quiet conflict. Fear whispered through my thoughts, fear of failing those who now relied on me, fear of the unknown path ahead, and doubt that my strength would endure what was to come. Yet beneath the fear there was also a longing, a deep, restless pull toward the purpose that destiny seemed to offer. I found myself caught between resistance and acceptance, the two forces entwined like branches in a storm. The push forward came not as a sudden command but as an inevitability, a summons I could not refuse. It was in the moment of the ritual ceremony when my hand touched the ancient stone altar and the voices around me rose in chant that I understood the path was set. The taste of bitter wine lingered on my tongue, mingling with the dry bread of duty as I swallowed the reality that I would walk this road no matter the cost. That symbolic scene remains etched in my memory. The torchlight flickering against the temple's cold walls, the heavy armor I wore pressing against my chest, and the voices chanting my name in a cadence both solemn and urgent. Outside, the wind howled through the gates, carrying with it the scent of rain and distant smoke. My hands trembled slightly as they were clasped by the elders, their grip firm yet carrying the weight of unspoken expectation. In that moment, destiny closed in around me like the tightening ropes of a net, binding me to a future I could neither escape nor fully comprehend. The ceremony was not a celebration, but a summons, a call to stand and lead, to bear the burdens that others had once carried before me. I recognized then that destiny was no longer a distant notion, but a force that shaped every breath I took and every step I made. To resist was to fight against the tide itself. And the tide had risen too high. I could no longer turn back. Each voice, each omen, each demand pressed me forward until only one road remained. Yet destiny never comes freely, and I soon learned its price. The war that raged beyond our walls demanded more than soldiers and strategy. It demanded a soul bound not by choice but by duty. The leaders decreed exile, a fate I could neither escape nor refuse, and with it came the quiet severing of the life I once knew. The air was thick with smoke and the sharp scent of burning wood, mingling with the wet earth beneath my feet, as I prepared to leave behind the home that had shaped me. I remember the heavy cloth of my worn cloak pressing against my skin, damp with the evening's cold rain, as I stepped into the shadowed dusk, each footfall a farewell to a world slipping away. The moment I understood this loss was unavoidable came slowly, like the fading light at day's end. Faces blurred in the flickering firelight, voices lowered in mourning, and the weight of inevitability settled like a stone upon my chest. There was no room for hope or rebellion. The path was set. I stood silent, the distant drums of war echoing like a heartbeat in the night, and felt the final thread of my past unravel beneath my fingers. The departure itself was raw and unadorned, a rough hand gripping mine briefly, the cold touch of earth beneath my boots, and the last glance cast toward an empty chair where laughter once lived. The taste of salt lingered on my lips, not from wine, but from the quiet tears I refused to shed in the presence of others. Afterward, a profound silence took hold. The fire's glow dimmed, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The absence was a heavy shadow that clung to every moment, a hollow space where dreams and memories once thrived. I felt the earth beneath me tremble with loss, and in that trembling I sensed the fracture within myself, The pain was not loud or violent, but a steady ache, a slow unraveling that seeped into my bones. It taught me the bitter clarity of sacrifice, that strength is born not from triumph alone, but from the wounds we carry in silence. In losing my freedom, I found a new understanding of resilience, a quiet humility that tempered the fire kindling within. A symbol of this loss remained with me. An old, cracked ring I carried in my palm, its metal worn smooth by years of touch. It was once a token of home, a simple band exchanged in a fleeting moment of peace, now transformed into a relic that bore the weight of all I had left behind. Whenever doubt gnawed at my resolve, I would close my fingers around that ring and feel the cold truth of sacrifice settle anew. It was both a reminder and a vow, a silent promise to endure the path destiny had carved for me, no matter the cost. Others around me reacted with a mixture of grief and respect, their eyes lowered or fixed on distant horizons as if sharing the burden silently. Some offered no words, their silence heavy with unspoken sorrow, while others, hardened by loss, met my gaze with a quiet acknowledgement of the price paid. Family and companions alike felt the ripple of absence, a void left where once there was warmth and certainty. Their grief was a mirror to my own, binding us in a shared understanding that what was lost could never be reclaimed, only carried forward. In the stillness that followed, I pondered the true nature of this offering. It was not merely a loss, but a transformation, a reshaping of the self that would guide my steps through the trials yet to come. The sacrifice carved a deeper channel within me, one through which both pain and purpose would flow. And though the wound was fresh and raw, it whispered a truth I could not ignore, that the journey ahead demanded more than courage. It demanded surrender. Yet even as grief hollowed me, I sensed that this was only the first of many offerings destiny would demand. With each dawn, new duties claimed their place, the mandates of councils, the demands of restless allies, the silent expectations etched into every glance from those who looked to me for guidance. Losses piled quietly beside me, like fallen leaves pressed beneath heavy boots, reminders of all that slipped beyond reach. The world I once moved through with tentative steps had transformed into a landscape of unyielding responsibility, where every action carved another line into the ledger of what I owed. My body bore the strain as surely as my spirit. Fatigue wove itself into the very fabric of my days, a persistent ache behind my eyes and a heaviness in my limbs that sleep could barely soothe. Scars, both old and new, itched beneath the rough cloth of my cloak, and hunger gnawed at my resolve during long nights when provisions were scarce and rest scarcer still. Each breath was measured, labored, as if the weight pressing down on my chest sought to claim even the air I drew. I became intimately acquainted with the creak of worn armor and the sting of rough stone beneath calloused hands, sensations as constant as the passage of time itself. But the burden was not only flesh and bone, it weighed heavier still upon my heart. Grief settled like a shadow, persistent and cold, wrapping itself around my thoughts with whispers of doubt and fear. The fear of what might yet be demanded, the doubt that perhaps I was not strong enough to bear the path set before me. These emotions were silent companions, unrelenting in their presence, threading through moments of quiet and storm alike. They hollowed spaces inside me where hope had once taken root, leaving a solemn emptiness that no outward victory could fill. Loneliness was the cruelest companion of all. Even when surrounded by others, warriors, elders, kin, the weight of my burden remained mine alone to carry. Their eyes might seek comfort or offer respect, but the pain was a solitary flame, flickering behind my gaze, unseen and unshared. The crowded halls echoed with murmurs and footsteps, yet between those sounds stretched a vast silence where my true struggle lived. No hand could lift this load, no voice could ease this ache. I was isolated within the very ranks that relied upon me, a solitary figure beneath the heavy mantle of expectation. That mantle itself became a symbol of my burden. The cloak I wore, once a simple garment, had grown into a shroud of responsibility. Its fabric was thick and coarse, weighed down by the dust of countless roads traveled and the dampness of many nights spent under open skies. It clung to my shoulders like a chain, forged not of metal, but of obligation and memory, dragging behind me the weight of all I had lost and all I had yet to lose. In moments of exhaustion, I could feel its weight as keenly as the pulse in my veins, a constant reminder that my journey was far from over. There was a moment, beneath a sky swollen with gathering clouds, when the weight nearly broke me. The endless road stretched before me, shadows lengthening as if to swallow the light itself. My breath came ragged, each inhale a battle, each exhale a surrender. I sank to my knees beside a rough stone, sweat stinging my eyes, hands trembling as they touched the cold earth. The silence pressed against me, heavy and complete, and for a heartbeat I felt the edges of myself fray, as if the burden might unravel all I had become. But even in that near collapse, something within held fast, a quiet, stubborn ember refusing to die. What carried me forward was not strength alone, but a steadfast endurance born of ritual and inner vow. At dawn, I would trace the line of my scar, a reminder of sacrifice and survival. In the stillness, I found solace in whispered prayers and the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat, anchoring me against the tide of doubt. Persistence became my refuge, each step taken not in hope of ease, but in acceptance of the journey's demand. It was a slow march beneath the weight, but a march nonetheless. But the greater the burden grew, the clearer it became. I was being led toward a trial of endurance that would test the limits of my soul. The burdens I carried drew me toward a single ordeal, a journey through desolation that tested every fiber of my being. The path stretched barren before me, a landscape stripped of mercy where the sun beat down with relentless fury and the nights offered only cold and silence. Each step demanded more than strength. It required a surrender to the slow, grinding process of survival. Hunger gnawed at my insides, thirst dried my tongue to cracked leather, and wounds long neglected throbbed beneath the coarse fabric that clung to my skin. My body, once a vessel of resolve, became a map of pain, blistered feet dragging through dust, bones aching with exhaustion, muscles trembling under the weight of my own will. The air smelled of dry earth and sweat, every breath a reminder of the scarcity that surrounded me. Inside the confines of my mind, the trial was no less cruel. Doubt crept like shadowed whispers, questioning the purpose of each faltering step. Fear took root, twisting into visions that danced at the edges of my senses, flickers of faces lost, echoes of failure. Despair settled like a shroud, threatening to suffocate the faintest spark of hope. At times, the line between reality and hallucination blurred. The barren horizon seemed to pulse and shift, the silence broken only by the pounding of my heart and the rasp of my breath. Thoughts of surrender surfaced repeatedly, a siren song promising release from the unyielding torment. Yet even as those dark tides pressed against me, I clung to a slender thread of resolve. There was a moment when the burden nearly claimed me. Collapsing onto scorched earth, my vision dimmed, the world tilting beneath unbearable weight. My hands, trembling and slick with sweat, sought purchase on the unforgiving ground. The silence around me was absolute, heavy enough to smother the faintest breath. For a heartbeat, I teetered on the edge of oblivion, the temptation to yield overwhelming. But in that void, a memory surfaced, the line of my scar, the vow etched into flesh and spirit. It was a silent promise, a tether to the self I refused to abandon. That flicker of faith rekindled something deep inside, a stubborn ember that refused to be extinguished. The struggle stretched on, measured not in miles but in moments survived. Each step was an act of quiet defiance, each breath a testament to persistence. The sun's searing glare gave way slowly to the muted colors of dawn. In that fragile light I found a symbol of survival. The first pale ray breaking over the horizon, spilling gold across the cracked earth. It was a final step, taken not with triumph, but with quiet endurance. A soft cry in the silence of a world that had offered no mercy. The cloak that weighed upon my shoulders seemed lighter then, as if the dawn itself had lifted some of the burden. From this ordeal I carried a lesson carved into the marrow of my bones. Resilience is not the roar of victory, but the steady beat of survival. Humility settled in alongside strength, a quiet understanding that endurance demands surrender to the slow rhythm of hardship. Clarity emerged from the depths of despair, revealing that survival was itself a form of wisdom, a foundation upon which all else must be built. I was not unbroken, but I remained unbowed, a vessel shaped by trial, tempered by pain, and bound by an unyielding resolve. Surviving the trial did not end my journey. It opened the path toward the wisdom I had yet to claim. In that quiet, clarity began to rise like the slow unfolding of dawn over a darkened world. I found myself beneath an open sky, where the first light spilled gently across the horizon, soft and sure. The air held the coolness of early morning, mingled with the faint scent of fresh earth and distant rain. It was in this fragile space between night and day that insight settled within me, not as a sudden blaze, but as a steady flame, illuminating the shadows left by suffering. The moment came as the sun's edge broke free from the darkness, casting pale gold over the cracked ground. I stood alone, the world hushed except for the whisper of a breeze stirring the dry grass. In that quiet, a vision unfolded, not a dream of grandeur, but a simple truth made clear by the light. That suffering was not a curse to bear in vain, but a chisel shaping the soul's deepest contours. I saw that my endurance was not merely survival against odds, but a passage toward understanding the fragile balance between pain and purpose. The dawn did not erase the darkness, it revealed the path through it. This truth settled deep within me, shifting the weight I carried. Where before there had been only hunger for escape or victory, now there was peace, a calm acceptance of the journey's demands and the limits of my control. Strength no longer meant defiance, but quiet resilience, a humility that recognized the vastness of what I did not yet know. Clarity unfolded like a river's slow current, steady and unyielding, carrying me away from despair's edge toward a grounded certainty. My heart beat with a steadier rhythm, less frantic, more measured, as if the very blood within me had learned a new language. The symbol of this wisdom was as simple as the flame of a single candle, flickering yet unextinguished against the night. It was a relic I carried, an old, worn pendant shaped like a burning star, its edges smoothed by time and touch. Though small and fragile in appearance, it embodied the quiet fire inside me, the spark that endured long after the trial's harsh winds had passed. Every time my fingers brushed that cool metal, I felt anchored, reminded that light need not be loud or grand to be real. It was the steady glow that guides through shadow, the patient warmth that refuses to die. Others began to notice this change, though no words were spoken. In their eyes I glimpsed a new calm authority, not born of command but of presence. Where before I had worn the restless tension of one uncertain, I now carried a silence that spoke volumes. Companions offered glances weighted with respect. Strangers paused with subtle recognition, sensing the depth beneath my steady gaze. It was not a transformation shouted from rooftops, but a quiet shift that rippled outward, touching moments and movements with something unspoken yet unmistakable. Life continued in its relentless flow, yet the world seemed refracted through a different lens. The same sun rose, the same winds blew, but my perspective had deepened into something steadier, more luminous. Challenges remained, shadows still clung to the edges of days, but I met them with a tempered heart, a mind less scattered. There was a deeper calm beneath the surface, a patience born not of resignation, but of knowing that every step forward was part of a larger unfolding. The horizon stretched before me, no longer a place of mere survival, but a path toward a fuller understanding. But wisdom without action is only a shadow, and soon I would be called to act upon what I had seen. It was here, amid the flickering light and the thickness of expectation, that I had to act on the truth that had settled deep inside me. The war beyond our walls tore at the edges of our fragile peace, and the council debated endlessly, caught between fear and fury. But my revelation demanded a different path, one of measured mercy when others called only for ruthless reprisal. I chose to speak not of conquest but of restraint, to order the withdrawal of forces poised for a vengeful strike, urging instead a strategy that valued preservation over destruction. This decision was not born of weakness, but from the quiet strength I had found in understanding suffering as a forge for endurance, not mere pain to be avenged. As my words settled into the chamber's heavy air, a profound silence followed. Some eyes widened in disbelief, others narrowed in suspicion. Yet beneath the surface of hesitation, a subtle shift rippled among those gathered, a respect born from the clarity with which I voiced a truth they had not dared to claim. In that moment, my hand rested lightly on an ancient staff, its surface worn smooth by generations of leaders who had wielded it as a symbol of guidance. It was no mere weapon, but a steadying presence, an emblem of the balance I sought to uphold. The staff grounded me, its weight a reminder that wisdom carries responsibility as much as light. Embodying this choice brought a calm I had never known before, a steady pulse of confidence that did not shout but simply was. It was the feeling of standing on solid earth after a long, uncertain journey, knowing the path ahead would demand more, but trusting that I was not lost. Yet not all welcomed this new way. Whispers of doubt curled through the halls, voices questioning my resolve, mocking the mercy I extended to those deemed enemies. Some turned away in silence, their eyes shadowed with betrayal. The resistance was subtle but unmistakable, a reminder that change, even when born of truth, unsettles the foundations of power and fear. Still the world moved forward, and so did I, carrying the quiet flame of that choice within me. The council's decree echoed beyond stone walls, a fragile promise that wisdom could shape fate even amid turmoil. But no wisdom lives untested, and soon the conflict that awaited me would sharpen every truth I had spoken into the edge of survival. The opposition took shape not as a single enemy, but as a tide within the council itself, a faction led by a rival whose eyes burned with the fire of old grudges and unyielding ambition. Their voices rose like thunder in the hall, where I had first laid bare my vision of mercy and measured strength. This was no mere debate. It was a trial of spirit and conviction, a battle fought with words sharper than any blade. They accused me of folly, of endangering our people by weakening our stance against the enemy beyond the walls. Their murmurs grew into shouts, their doubt cutting through the air like cold steel. I felt the weight of their disbelief pressing against my chest, a storm gathering in the depths of my own resolve. The clash reached its height beneath the flickering torchlight, where banners hung heavy and faces turned like a gathering tempest. My rival's voice rang loud, accusing me of betrayal, not to the enemy, but to our own cause. "How can mercy be strength?" he demanded, eyes locked on mine. "In war, only the unyielding survive. Your softness will bleed us dry." The chamber's breath held tight, waiting for my answer, as if the very stones leaned in to hear. It was a moment thick with the scent of burning oil and sweat, the silence after his words heavier than any shout. Doubt crept like a shadow across my mind. For a fleeting breath I wondered if the truth I carried could endure such fire, if the path I chose was nothing but a fragile dream beneath the weight of this storm. Yet in that silence I found my center. I spoke then, steady and low, words shaped by the years of pain and reflection that had forged my wisdom. "Strength is not only the sword raised high," I said, "but the hand held steady in restraint. Our survival depends not on endless bloodshed, but on the courage to spare what remains whole." The sound of my voice carried through the hall, a quiet defiance that did not seek to shout down, but to stand firm. I felt the rough stone beneath my feet anchor me. The ancient staff in my hand, a tangible link to those who had walked this path before, their strength lending mine its weight. This was the vow I upheld, a silent promise etched not in words alone, but in the steady pulse of conviction. The outcome was neither triumph nor defeat, but survival. A fragile truce born from the clash of wills. Some within the council nodded slowly, their respect grudging but real. Others retreated into silence, their doubt a shadow that would linger. The rival's gaze met mine one last time, sharp but no longer triumphant. In that moment, I carried with me a new scar, not upon flesh, but upon spirit, a reminder that wisdom must be tested by fire to prove its mettle. The broken edge of my staff, chipped during the heated exchange, became a symbol of that trial. Imperfect, marked by conflict, yet unbroken and held fast in my hand. That scar taught me what no quiet reflection could, that truth is not a shield against all harm, but a light that guides through the darkest hours. I tasted the bitterness of words aimed to wound, and the salt of fear that threatened to undo me, yet beneath it all lay the steady warmth of purpose. The hall smelled of smoke and iron, the echo of voices a lasting drumbeat within my mind. I understood then that holding to wisdom required not only courage but endurance, a readiness to face the storms yet to come. This was not the final storm. It was only the first wave of greater conflicts that destiny was yet to bring against me. The enemies multiplied like shadows at dusk, growing armies of dissenters, deeper councils that whispered in secret chambers, and opposition that no longer confined itself to words but surged in deeds. Their ranks swelled beyond the walls of the hall where I once held steady. They came with banners torn and faces twisted in anger, determined to erase the path I had carved through pain and solitude. They sought not only to confront me, but to undo all I had built. My teachings were twisted into lies, my words rewritten by tongues both cruel and cunning, my name whispered with venom in places once sacred. It was as though a slow rot had begun, eroding the foundation of my legacy with every breath of betrayal. Those I had trusted, the allies who once stood beside me in silence and strength, wavered under the weight of fear and ambition. Some turned away, their eyes averted when I sought counsel. Others fell silent, their loyalty swallowed by the rising storm. The absence of their voices was a cold wind that pierced deeper than any blade, a reminder that even the firmest bonds can fray when tested by relentless pressure. Their retreat was not marked by loud defection, but by the quiet, suffocating hush of abandonment. In those moments, I felt the sting of solitude sharpen, the rough edges of isolation grinding against my spirit. The stage for the great confrontation was set beneath a sky heavy with rain and thunder, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and smoke. The council chamber, once a place of measured discourse, had become an arena charged with tension, the walls echoing the roar of restless crowds beyond. Torches flickered against storm-dark windows, casting long shadows that danced like spectres on cracked stone. The banners, symbols of unity and purpose, hung shredded, their colours dulled by rain and conflict. This was no longer a mere contest of ideas, it was a battle for the soul of all I had endeavoured to protect. When the clash came, it was as if the very air trembled with fury. Words were hurled like thunderbolts, voices rising and falling in a tempest of accusation and defiance. Steel rang out as tempers ignited into violence, the sharp clang of broken wood and cold metal filling the chamber's hollow spaces. The scent of blood mingled with incense and rain, a bitter perfume that seeped into my skin and bones. I could taste the ash of betrayal on my tongue, bitter and dry, while my hands trembled not from fear, but from the effort to hold fast amid the chaos. In that maelstrom, my legacy teetered on the brink of ruin. It was near ruin indeed. The very foundations I had laid were threatened to crumble beneath the weight of relentless assault. My teachings were questioned, my work defamed, and the memory of what I stood for nearly erased. A symbol of this threat stood stark before me, a shattered relic, once a proud emblem of our unity, now broken and discarded at my feet. Its fractured form mirrored the fractures, spreading through the trust and strength I had fought so hard to build. This relic, dulled and cracked, became the mark of the danger engulfing all I held dear. Yet through the storm and ruin, I survived. Not unscathed, for my body bore the marks of struggle and my spirit carried fresh wounds, but still standing. I clung to the fragments of truth like a lifeline, holding fast to the core of what I knew to be real and just. The cold rain that drenched me was a baptism of endurance, a reminder that survival demanded more than strength. It required unwavering faith in the fragile flame of legacy. Though battered, that flame still flickered within me, a stubborn light against the gathering dark. In the quiet aftermath, I came to understand the nature of legacy itself. It is not a stone carved eternal, unyielding and unchanging. Rather, it is a fragile flame, flickering in the wind of time and trial. It endures not because it is untouched, but because it survives the blows that threaten to snuff it out. Memory, spirit, and the quiet persistence of truth become the embers that refuse to die, even when all else seems lost. This understanding settled deep within me, a solemn acceptance of the fragile beauty of what I carried forward. Yet I knew this was not the final reckoning. The deepest confrontation would not come from the world outside, but from within my own destiny. The storms that raged beyond the walls were but heralds of a trial yet greater, one that would demand not only survival, but transformation at the most intimate and profound levels of my being. The air was thick with the scent of earth and distant smoke, heavy and still, as if the world itself held its breath. Here, far from the clamor of councils and shattered banners, I faced the weight of what my destiny demanded, a duty woven through years of sacrifice, a vow unbroken despite the fractures around me and the slow, certain approach of death that no sword nor shield could delay. It was a burden I had carried with clenched fists and trembling hands, resisting the truth hidden beneath its quiet insistence. Within the cave's cold embrace, doubt crept in like a whisper on the wind. Regret settled deep in my bones, memories of choices made and paths abandoned, curling like smoke in the dimness. Fear gnawed at the edges of my resolve, the fear of failing those who had placed their trust in me, of leaving behind only ashes where once a flame had burned. Guilt lingered like a bitter taste, the metallic tang sharp on my tongue, recalling moments when mercy faltered and strength wavered. The solitude forced me to confront these shadows, their voices rising in a silent chorus that threatened to drown the steadiness I had fought to maintain. Then in the hush of night, the reckoning came, not as a roar, but as a vision, fragile and clear. A single flame flickered before me, its light wavering yet unyielding against the encompassing dark. It whispered not of endings, but of continuance, the quiet persistence of spirit beyond the storm. In that moment, the silence spoke louder than any clash of steel. It revealed the truth I had long evaded. Destiny was not a chain to bind me, but a path already etched by every scar and choice, by the very breath that sustained me in this final solitude. I became deeply aware of my mortality, the weight of years pressing down like the cold stone beneath me. My wounds, both seen and hidden, throbbed with the inevitability of time's passage. Life's limits stretched before me, vast and unyielding as the endless stars that pierced the cavern's mouth above. The steady drip of water echoed the slow, measured beat of my heart, a reminder that even as flesh weakens and breath falters, the story we leave behind threads through the fabric of time, beyond the fragile vessel of life. In the quiet surrender that followed, I found a strange peace. The turmoil within softened into resolve, a stillness that no storm could shatter. I bowed not in defeat, but in understanding, accepting the shape of what I must become, not as a leader bound by fear or ambition, but as a keeper of a fragile flame that must be passed on. The scar etched deep into my left hand, once a mark of betrayal and pain, now shone as a symbol of this reckoning, a silent testament to resilience carved into flesh and soul. Reflecting on destiny, I understood it as a path, not chains, a journey marked by the steps already taken, not a prison to escape. It was the sum of every choice, every wound, every moment of courage and mercy that defined me. Destiny was not a fixed fate imposed from without, but an intimate truth I carried within, shaped by the life I had lived and the legacy I was yet to leave behind. For in that surrender I saw the shape of the final step. Not my struggle alone, but the legacy that would outlive me. The world outside moved on, unaware of the fading flame within me, yet inside, time slowed to the rhythm of a heart growing still. I felt the sweetness of simple moments, the taste of cool water on my lips, the softness of worn parchment beneath my fingers, the gentle warmth of a hand held in farewell. In those moments, I understood what I had truly left behind, not grand monuments or trophies, but words spoken and written, deeds etched quietly into the lives of those who listened and watched. The memory of my journey whispered through stories told by children at twilight, in the steady footsteps of students who carried my lessons forward, and even in the silent strength of strangers who, unknowingly, followed the path I had traced. The legacy lived on as a flame, small but enduring, flickering in the hearts of those who believed in more than the fleeting shadows of power. It was a flame that warmed the coldest night, a beacon that never demanded attention but offered light to any who sought it. Beyond the fragile span of years, this flame became an eternal thread woven into the vast tapestry of time, an echo that danced across generations, a quiet song that no silence could silence. Reflecting on the journey, I saw it whole and complete. Nothing had been wasted. Every step, every scar, every whispered hope had shaped not only my story, but the stories of those who followed. The path I walked was not a solitary line, but a circle, ever turning, ever expanding. And so, though my voice has fallen silent, the story lingers like a whisper that carries through the ages,